This program is going to be all about analytics, the incredible world of analytics.
There are often challenges and problems in every spectrum of the activities, whether it is business or running an institution, product organization, or a service organization. Analytics is all about trying to understand the context and the density of the context, and therefore collect relevant data, process the data.
Is it that analytics has suddenly become a new thing? After all, the points that you're making have always been relevant through history.
It was there for many years.
There's an excess or a glut of data today which enables us to make more sophisticated decisions. Is that what we're talking about?
Variety of innovation have taken place. The world has moved on, and today instantaneous information.
Say the younger new generation which is going to enter the workforce, what do they need to be aware of so they can be good at in this area of analytics?
The context can keep changing. The world is just becoming more complex. There are things that are changing and evolving very quickly.
Two things I want to point out. Both of you have talked about data, and I agree. I think to make decisions based on data is the CXO suite, generally speaking, adept at data analytics. But yet everybody talks about my gut feel says, my experience says. Don't they talk like that?
They do that. And when they say that, immediately they say, we also need to collect data, then I'll come back and confirm. Because they are not confirming. A doctor cannot tell a patient by gut feel, operation will be successful and you know what,
Yeah.
So therefore it is very important for them to always anchor with facts.
This program is going to be all about analytics, the incredible world of analytics. My name is Vasudev Murthy. I'm the Executive Director of the School of Entrepreneurship. And with me are two very distinguished guests. One is Dr. Sankaran, who's a partner at KPMG, partner in business transformation, as I understand. And we have Gaurv Bhatia, who's the CEO and founder of edept, which looks at the skill gaps that the industry is noticing and how we can prepare students for that. So I think between the two of you, you're going to be able to give us some fantastic insights as to what analytics is about and how analytics will shape perhaps the future in more ways than one. All right. But let's go back to some fundamentals. So let me first ask Dr. Shankar, at the risk of sounding very naive, what is analytics? Let's start with that very fundamental question.
Thank you, Vasu, for that very important question, because if the basics are not taken care, then whatever the superstructure we built, it's not going to work. There are often challenges and problems in every spectrum of the activities, whether it is business or running an institution, product organization, or a service organizations. And there's not only a challenge or a problem, but also opportunities that are evolving. If you can't weigh these opportunities and challenges, we will not be able to take decisions. So analytics is all about trying to understand the context and the density of the context, and therefore collect relevant data, process the data, synthesize them, so that we can get certain outputs with which certain decisions can be taken, whether it is market penetration, geography expansion, or product diversification, or even decommissioning some of the existing products. In all of these important critical decisions, what we are trying to do is what decision to be taken, unless otherwise we have data on hand, and analytics take us very closer to the facts.
So Dr. Shankar, I want to put you on the spot here. Is it that analytics has suddenly become a new thing? After all, the points that you're making have always been relevant through history. Is it that there's a excess or a glut of data today which enables us to make more sophisticated decisions? Is that what we're talking about?
Okay, great question once again. It was there for many years.
Yeah.
But the kind of collaborators and accelerators, such as you now currently talk about Gen AI.
Yeah.
Then we currently talk about a lot of tools that are coming up. Look at the dashboard itself. Gone are the days where simple Excel dashboards that we were started seeing. Suddenly we started looking at different types of tools that are coming in, like Tableau coming into picture, or Blue Prism coming in. So variety of innovation have taken place. The world has moved on. And today, instantaneous information, instantaneous data is something which is being sought about. And therefore, it has taken a prominence. Suddenly you find these competencies have started elevating, in coming into multi-folds. And even the leadership team, the CXO so-called in the companies, have started relying on, without taking the help of data, I will not be able to get to a permanent solution. Today, we need two things. One is permanent solution for a problem, and we need early warning signals. If these two are not going to be there, it's going to be very difficult. And these two cannot come in without the intervention of data and analytics.
So it sounds like businesses are literally running on a treadmill in that sense, and it has to be constantly augmented with data. But I'll come back to you. The very important question. Now let me maybe to you, Gaurav. So what does this say? If the future is all about understanding data, coming to conclusions. In fact, there are 4 or 5 different kinds of analytics. We have descriptive analytics, diagnostic analytics, predictive analytics, prescriptive analytics. So it's getting very sophisticated. The finer nuances are really coming out very, very well. But all that is questionable if the skill gap of people who are entering this thing is entering this area is not addressed. So what can you tell us about how let's say the younger new generation which is going to enter the workforce, what do they need to be good at? What do they need to be aware of so they can be good at in this area of analytics?
The most important piece is students have to have the capability of understanding things by first principles.
By first principles, okay.
The context can keep changing, right? The world is just becoming more complex. There are things that are changing and evolving very, very quickly. There's always we know, let's say 1950s or 60s when computers essentially were becoming, 1970s rather, in India, when computers were becoming mainstream, and and we started seeing them in banks, for example, much later. There was the fear that people are going to lose jobs, right? And again, you're probably seeing a similar cycle of people saying, okay, we're already seeing, like, for example, Paytm very recently replaced people because they said that the work that we are doing can be done using AI. So the question here is, that's always going to be the case where certain elements of human labor, for example, will be replaced by a machine if a machine can do it better. But what cannot be replaced essentially is the capability to think, the capability to understand things by first principles. Because eventually, even when I'm understanding a few things, for example, prescriptive analytics, a lot of things that are going to be prescribed, right, somebody has to put a thought into it, that this is what that should look like, right? So eventually, what solution am I creating, right? Unless I understand unless I understand the problem statement, I'm able to understand the end user, for example, in what context that decision is going to be taken. I won't be able to, share an outcome. I'll share a very personal example.
Please.
6 to 8 months back, I was pushed into I had a call coming in from a very leading medical labs company, saying that I haven't done a full body checkup and I think my wife should be doing it. They gave me an offer. I said, fine, let's do it. It's been a year since I've taken it up. I took it up. Subsequently, let's say in a period of about 2 to 3 days, I got a call that I need to do a retest because there seem to be certain cancerous indicators that are popping up in the test for my wife. Went ahead with those indicators, and that again got reiterated. Now, as a layman, because I'm not a medical practitioner, I was taken aback because the tests were effectively pointing out that there is something not right about the reports. The reports are not normal. Both I and my wife were worried about what those reports mean. And it did take a toll on our minds. Only to go back and, eventually when we went and spoke to a few doctors and a senior specialist, that those reports were debunked. And the question that came up is, you can't look at those reports in isolation. Data cannot be looked at isolation unless you have a complete picture around other aspects outside that data as well that cumulatively go out and support that argument. So what happens, and why am I bringing this point in? We are living in a world where there is abundance of data. We are living in a world where data can be conceptualized and understood in many different ways. But unless I'm able to contextualize it and I'm able to understand the broader full picture and understand things first, I'll not be able to take correct decisions.
I see.
So in this world and in this environment, right, where things are getting complex, how am I integrating information, right, to make a decision that is coherent and that is logical becomes important. And that is where nothing can beat human intelligence. So while I can use or have indicators that pop up, how I effectively use those indicators to make a decision becomes very critical. And that is where, there will always be a need for somebody who's either effectively able to teach a machine how to do it or effectively, understand that I don't have all the parameters to make a decision. And I think that needs to be taught. Students will always go back and say, I'm not good at statistics or I'm not good at maths, so maybe analytics is not for me. No, that's not true. There's a quantitative side of things and there's a qualitative side of things, right? I also have to represent and show data. And data is about storytelling. How I am able to tell a story with the information that I'm getting becomes very, very important. And hence, teaching children, young adults, for example, or students, for example, how this data tells me, what story is the data telling me? What story is this, what can I get from these facts? How do I represent it from point A to point B? What is my logical transition? How do I look at it? That becomes very, very important.
That sounds like a major educational transformation itself. Because if you remember our own education system, I don't really think these points were emphasized very much. It was a series of subjects, and somehow we got through and muddled away. But now there's an onus on education to teach people critical thinking and this kind of storytelling. But I want to come back to that point in just a second. Let me just switch over to Dr. Sankaran. So, Dr. Sankaran, in the context of executive decision making, two things I want to point out. I mean, both of you have talked about data, and I agree. I think to make decisions based on data, prima facie sounds like a objective and a rational thing. But 2 points. Number one, is the CXO suite, generally speaking, adept at data analytics overall? Number one. Second, can we really divorce emotion from decision making? Because that's what is our so-called claim to fame as human beings. What do you think about that?
Absolutely. In fact, there are many institutions that have done survey with the CEOs and CXOs. And every year, some of the institutions are doing this. And I was going through some of these thought leadership reports and articles. And I'm able to infer from, irrespective of multiple institutions, almost 87% of the CXOs believe that they want to convert their organization and their own competencies to data-driven approach. Because the belief has come in the last 5 to 6 years that data is no more a vertical, analytics is no more a vertical, it's a horizontal. It is all pervasive now.
Wonderful.
Second important thing, which is now in the current trend and it's going to be staying in the future, is every leadership team wants to create connected enterprise.
Okay, nice. Okay.
And irrespective of any organizations, whether you're product, manufacturing, or service-oriented organization, there are only 3 offices broadly. One is front office, then middle office, back office. Let's, for the conversation sake, keep these 3. And the success of an enterprise is how all these 3 are connected with each other.
Working in sync.
And there are so much of data. As Gaurav rightly said, there are plethora of data that are flowing in. And at some point in time, there are millions and millions of data in the table in the form of a dashboard and reports. And all that the leadership team is to blink at the report. What else I can infer from it? And that's where the connected enterprise comes through data. So a CXO has now realized that if I'm not able to study the pattern of this data, if I myself don't know what this data is giving me a message, I will not be able to take a right decision. And always it's like taking decision based on intuition.
Yes.
And thinking and feeling. It's like shooting in the dark room and still expecting that you will hit the target.
But yet everybody talks about my gut feel says, my experience says. Don't they talk like that?
They do that. And when they say that, immediately they say, we also need to collect data, then I will come back and confirm. Because they are not confirming. Without confirmation, no assurance can come. Now, a doctor cannot tell a patient by gut feel, operation will be successful and you know what. So therefore, it is very important for them to always anchor with facts. And today you look at the end root of data architecture. You collect the data, and the CXOs are now realizing, when I collect about the organization health, how is my business doing? I infer information from data. See, what I'm extracting very interestingly from data, information. Looking at the information, knowledge. Let me gain what it is. From knowledge, wisdom. I think this is where the flow is going to be. And without this, it's going to be very difficult for the organizations which are forthcoming. In fact, a lot of startup companies. Very interesting to say, I went to one of the leading management institution. I suddenly saw just giving a talk on leadership and data. And very, very experienced people sitting out. I honestly thought they're all professors sitting out there. And as a casual discussion, I just had a conversation with a couple of them, and they said, no, we are all students here. We have enrolled for a data analytics course here.
Nice,
for 1.5 years and 2 years program. Why? You're already a CXO, CAO, CFO. They said, now, whatever the role we are in, we realize that we need to look at data, interpret data, synthesize, and then derive information. I cannot stand up in front of the customers, whether it is internal or external, and say, you all need to trust what I'm saying, not because what I'm saying, but because what the number says, what the data says. I think that paradigm has come in, and it is here to stay. And it is better that in the best interest of running a connected enterprise, everyone have this data as thinking as key competence.
So this question, I suppose, for both of you in that case. First of all, when we talk about data, again, almost by definition, we can't avoid it. We talk about numbers, and but not everybody is number driven. That's also true, isn't it? I mean, many of us have, for XYZ reason, going back to childhood trauma, who knows what, we have an aversion towards numbers, and yet we see patterns. going back to my favorite subject, how of music actually, how it is that we detect certain patterns in music and we know what's happening. We're always doing that, as a matter of fact. And we solve jigsaw puzzles, we have other things, and there are no numbers there necessarily, but there's a pattern recognition paradigm. So maybe I should start with you. So when students are supposedly not very keen on numbers for we don't know historical reasons, can we still position them as people with a potential future in analytics, or what do we need to do with them?
I think that's a good question. So one is that there has to be some literacy. They can't do an analytics program without understanding how numbers work, how statistics work. That's actually the fundamental theory behind it. I think a lot of things can be taught with a viewpoint on how it is applied and giving them what they need to know, right? No, you don't need to necessarily have, you don't really need to know complex algebra, for example, or calculus, for example. But what you do need to know is, am I taking decisions keeping in mind that this data is, I'm able to correctly interpret the data that I'm looking at, and eventually knowing numbers is important. So two parts. There is one about quantitative interpretation of numbers, and again I'll go back to what I had mentioned slightly earlier. There's also about how I can convert or look at those facts and transform that into a story or visually represent that, right?
Okay.
Somebody could be excellent at doing that, right? Now this particular person may be very, very good at showing an information that can be understood very well, for example, by somebody who's in in school, and can also explain that same information very well to, let's say, somebody like Sankaran ji, for example, who is a practitioner, a very senior leader, and that story has to be more nuanced, for example, for somebody like him, but can be very basic, for example, to a 10-year-old. And I think the point I'm trying to make over here is that's also an art and a skill. So analytics doesn't necessarily mean somebody who has, is not very good at, let's say, high school mathematics will not succeed at. With the right fundamentals, that thing can be taught, but there is no going away from numbers, right? I mean, you can't really say that I'm a business analyst, but I don't want to look at numbers for the rest of my life. I think that will be a lie.
Yes, fair point. But let me ask you, in your experience working with industry leaders, I agree. I mean, intuitively, we can hardly argue with the fact that you have to use data. But have you seen instances where people have senior leaders, based on, let's say, the experience, hunch, intuition, have overridden or put aside the data because some other instinct is telling them to take a different kind of decision? Does that happen from time to time?
Oh yes, it has. It multiple times, in fact, and in basis this various leadership outlook survey that different institutions conduct. I can also share with you where many of the CEOs have confessed that data did tell me it's going to be incorrect decision. I tried it out, a chance.
I see.
Okay. And it was also there in the public domain report, several air crash investigations. That was a big episode that is going on, where the report says, according to the investigation agency, more than 77% of the air crash investigations, the crew members, the pilot and team already received the data that something is wrong.
They chose to ignore it.
They chose to ignore it.
That's serious.
Now, this is where the challenge that comes through. Now, you take that huge risk. Now, the data says something. As he rightly talked about the health-related issues, data says, report says something. Now, what are you going to do? Are you going to take it seriously and work on it, or are you going to ignore it? This is a key question. And as to the earlier question that you asked, a very relevant one, everybody thinks, including CEOs, they have two challenges. One, I'm not number savvy. Okay, I go by my experience. In fact, to be very honest, even if they go by their experience, they are using numbers unconsciously. In the back of their mind, they are thinking, 5 times I tried this.
It didn't work.
Okay, it didn't work. So 6th time, it's not going to work. Or 6th time, I'm going to try it differently.
So there are numbers.
The back of even the kids, I'll tell you, was interesting. Look at the sports today. Which sports doesn't have numbers?
Indeed.
More than looking at the cricket match and the players, we are only looking at the graphical representations or pie diagram, this, that. So everybody, the hard truth today is, the reality is, everybody is analytical thinking. Everybody has the skill set. They only think, statistics. The moment you say statistics, K-mean clustering, then linear regression, random, the techniques, they are averse to, they stay away from it. I think this is where we need to build the gap. You already have that analytical capability. All that, what you're going to do is, to that analytical capability, when you put the data in right perspective, apply right technique, you can get into the right conclusions. I think this message is what is very, very important. It's not, I have not come across anybody with zero analytical skills. They will at least have one or two. It's not going to be zero, because they even go to a shop and then transact.
Yeah, we do.
You need to have the numbers.
Yeah, absolutely.
And today, some of the people, look at the 12th or 11th standard students talking much better in terms of run rate projections in a cricket match. And he can talk about numbers where a batsman is quite weak, and that's what even the coaches are now using technology and data to say, what, if as a batsman, if you think you are weak in back foot, 90% of the times you got out in front foot. So you may have to just look at where you are strong, where you are weak, and numbers come to that rescue.
Fantastic. What a lovely answer. So I have a question which I'll ask you first and then I'll move to him. So given that we all accept very, very fervently that a good grasp of data analytics is necessary for good decision making, and obviously presumably career skills as well. First of all, do you see a skill gap? That's my first question to you, in the sense of people entering the work stream. Second, from your point of view, as you're saying, are we satisfied that the people entering the workforce are sufficiently skilled, or do they need to do some extra stuff? Maybe I'm asking you this question earlier in a different way, but I want to correlate this, in sense of supply of data analytics ready in the professionals who then will be entrusted to do to make decisions, versus what the supply is coming from here.
Absolutely, there is a gap. Also, it's a very important question. There is a gap, significant gap. In fact, the reason is, now we learned this language, and I got to know this only through various CXOs. When they came out, some of the CXOs who completed the course, and they came out and they said, now we understand very clearly where there is a gap. Because we worked for such a long time, chief delivery officer in the capacity of chief operating officer, when we enroll for a course, and then when we walk out, we are able to constantly apply in the back of our mind how this will be relevant in the industry context. This particular technique, in what situation it will come back and solve my problem. How do I leverage? So they learned, imagine, CXOs getting enrolled for a data analytics course, learning the concepts purely from application lens. Our students are learning it not through application lens, as concept as a whole, as he rightly said, in isolation, in silos. Because why? I need to learn these terminologies, and they think if they come to an interview, through the terminologies, they will get the job. And after that, how they are going to be applied. So we significantly lack application orientation.
Would you agree with that?
100%. 100%. I think the biggest challenge is that students are often divorced from what's happening in industry. For 3 years or 4 years, depending on length of the program, and I think it's all moving towards 4 years now, students are learning information without an understanding of how this really works for them, right? And a lot of students are asking today, can I apply it? The question that I have for a lot of young graduates when I'm interviewing them, or that I've interviewed so far in the past, I've realized that there are two things which are very important. One is their articulation of what they understand. Firstly, is very shallow, right? They will come and tell you that they have learned 10 tools, and they would put a tool as a tick mark. But how can those tools be applied? In what context have they applied them? How can that be used? None of them are aware of, right? And I think where we really genuinely need to see better outcomes is a marriage of, yes, these are the tools that are important, but this is also how industry is using some of these tools. And this is how this can be made useful, right? It's not just important like in a classroom setting to have 10 hours of practicals, but the students are not doing anything meaningful in those practicals, but ticking the boxes, but actually using those 10 hours to say, all right, let's use this in a real world application, see how X organization has solved the problem, let's get to apply those, right? So with those experiences, when they cumulatively add up and you look at them as a summary, the student can then go into an interview and say, I know how a problem, for example, if I'm appearing for an interview for, let's say, for a role in marketing, I can go back and say how I've used data, or how data can be used to help me take better decisions. If I'm using performance marketing, for example, that is, if should I spend more on Google, or should I spend more on Meta, or should I spend more on another channel, then I can take decisions keeping data in mind, rather than I believe that my audience, because this has a larger number of people on that platform, so this is a better platform for me. It might not necessarily be the case. So I think that those contexts are what students are missing on. And a lot of that can actually be taught. You don't have to wait to get into the workforce.
That's fantastic. But then I'll ask you a question again. We'll switch back and forth. Is there an ethical dimension to data analytics?
There is.
Could you just tell us briefly? Let's see how your views compare.
Data can be visualized and shown the way I want you to. So, for example, I could be a cricketer, right? And we spoke about IPL, and my performance against short pitch bowling, right, has improved significantly. Let's say since 2019, I've been playing cricket since 2015. Between 2015 and 2019, I would largely get out on short pitch balls, right? But since 2019, I've improved, right? And so my capability as a batsman to face those deliveries has improved. If I am, for example, now looking at, I'm a young cricketer, I want to, approach a leading team, let's say in a league outside of India, I want to apply to that league. And for example, this league is happening in Australia, right? It's extremely important for me to share data. If I showcase data, for example, or if I find somebody who showcases my data from a certain time frame, it will show a different story. And if I want to hide facts, I can change that data point to be a different timeline where it shows a very different story. How I want to show the story can really differ on when I start that, what my baseline is, for example. Is that an ethical question? Yes, it is, right? Because I'm showing you half the truth, I'm not showing you the entire truth.
Interesting.
Right? I'm just giving a very simple name. And I think it's important that given we are living in a world where a lot of us are using data to help people make decisions, whether it be in their buying decisions, whether it be in their hiring decisions, whether it be in ensuring that somebody gets, if there are two people applying, expecting a promotion, who is the most competent person, again, I'm going to go back and look at data. At each of these points, there is a decision that has been taken that eventually will have some sort of financial impact, right? And hence ethics become very important. Where there's money, there is often a lack of ethics also, because people might want to use information and share that incorrectly. I understand from some of the discussions I've had, there's already some work happening on this front, but maybe you can probably share.
So you talked about about ethics. So I would really want to ask you that question as well. Making money and ethics. Now, if you walk into the lobby of many companies, right, you would have seen one of the things is people are our assets, ethics, values. They talk a lot about that, and yet we know in practice it's not always the case. I mean, sadly, it's not the case. Now you have powerful tool like data analytics. If you look at certain companies, they say we stand by people to thick and thin. We'll hang on to them. This will pass, etc. They will, But if you are really objective, then would you, for example, reduce your workforce or those kinds of things? So I'm personally, I'm a little confused as to whether the intersection between ethical values of a company, let's say, and decisions taken based on data analytics. What is the story there? Is there a story?
Oh yes, Vasu. In fact, one of the key questions that we asked majority of the CEOs: why are you not taking decision based on data? Okay. Why do you believe in your own intuition?
Okay.
The standard answer and commonality, they say data sovereignty. Oh, I can't trust the data.
Really? I see.
Where is it coming from? What is the source? So more than the technique application and then inferences, first of all, let me get convinced that where is the source of this data and can I rely on this data? So data source, data reliability, data dependability, we need to do a lot more in that area before that's where the ethical dimension comes. Now look at, we talked about Gen AI.
Yeah.
Too many standards and frameworks have started flowing now in the industry. Indeed. The first has been ISO standard. ISO 42000 has now been released just about 3 months back. And that standard is all about ethical way of implementing Gen AI.
Wow.
Okay. So people are not going to be worried going forward how much of AI you implemented. Where have you implemented it? We have also seen some cases, right? In some more, for obvious reasons, I'm not naming the company, where they fetched their data, pollution data, and then they reflected something else. And the regulators came very heavily on them. Why are today's statutory and regulatory requirements are becoming a lot more stringent? Why are they coming very heavily on companies? Because how do you use the data? So I think this is where we were just talking about automation. It's not about automate everything. Where we need automation, where we can get maximum mileage out of it. Data input, data source, automate. But in terms of taking decision, think tank and innovation, you want human intelligence, not just artificial intelligence. This is the context that's going to come through. So ethical and integrity angle is something which is going to be extremely important.
Very interesting.
And data on connection, I'll tell you, was a very interesting one. Even if in one silos you lie the data, you fetch the data, it will show up elsewhere.
I see.
The truth comes out with numbers. But if you look at it in isolation, you may not get it. On the one hand, I run after as a company to satisfy my customers, but my employees are bleeding. My employees are struggling, and I overlook that. Customer satisfaction is more important. That's the only thing.
We often say that.
And then finally, we come back and say, you're not going to retain best talent in your organization. So how are you doing on your talent management? Is there a balance? Business is all about balance. Now, today we talked about ESG. Few years back, we talked about triple P. We said planet, profit, and people. Maintain a balance. So the numbers is going to reflect that, and the organization will have to meticulously plan, saying that how am I going to collect data which is far more reliable and dependable. I'm not going to misuse the data against individual, rather use the data to put the right ecosystems in place to run my business successfully. Then you know what? Why are we going to get incorrect data? Then your data, so ensure data sovereignty. If it's possible, apply AI and tools and technology for data collection at source, and then make sure I use data to run my organization successful, not only for my internal stakeholders, but also for the external stakeholders.
So extending your point across, therefore, we can is it fair to conclude that if we have a data analytics capability which is robust, which relies on verified, sanitized data, first of all, it sounds like you're automatically working towards competitive advantage.
Absolutely.
But if we take this further, does this also say that there could be a situation where national security also we can be thinking about data analytics? I don't know if that's a fair question, but I'm thinking he who has better control and analyzes data better, could nations actually fight over data? Do you think it's possible?
Data is the new oil.
Data is?
Data is the new oil. I think that's the phrase that's been there for. So eventually, how data is interpreted, how data is applied, will also be used to make certain decisions, right? It's already happening, by the way. I mean, there's what I'm talking about in the global context. It's already happening. So whether we are in a world where currently we have a few ongoing wars. I think every side is applying and looking at data to make certain decisions. There are precedents. Then those precedents, for example, could lead to that data essentially going out and showing a pattern. That pattern can show a risk, and then that risk is essentially being acted on. So eventually there is a lot of this is about pattern recognition, as you kind of say. And so when it comes down to nations and it comes down to how data is being used, I think some of that is also about interpreting some of those patterns and seeing from a security standpoint how you kind of drive it.
So from an implicit data war to an explicit data war is what we're heading towards.
So this is both interesting and fascinating, and I'm really thankful to both of you for sharing your perspectives. I think with AI comes into the picture, and it's going to make our lives complicated. It already has. We will see more and more twists, and I hope that we can have a conversation on this again in the near future. But I want to thank both of you for your time.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for listening in. Thank you.